Hello everyone and welcome to this video. This is Fawad Alavi, and in this video we are going to talk about how to write integration tests for ASP.NET Core. We are going to use WebApplicationFactory and TestContainers. Then stay tuned. Let's start with taking a look at Microsoft documentation about integration tests. Okay, here Microsoft explains that first you need to write unit test, and whatever you can test with unit test, do not test it with integration test. And after that, it explains that writing integration tests are just for some specific scenarios. For example, when you want to check the borders of your components or borders of your systems, and when you want to check if the modules, if the units of work that you have inside your application working correctly together or not, like when you are using databases, file system, and the description that you can see here. And after that, it says that do not write integration tests for all edit of data when you have access to the file or databases. Just pick some specific scenarios that you want to test something and just test them, because if you can add something to the database or get something from database, it will work for the rest of the tables. And in the scenario that you chose, if you have some other dependencies like loggers, like something that you are going to put inside a RabbitMQ, if you want to test database, mark everything else. You don't want to test all the functionality of your system in one unit test. Pick a scenario, clean it up, mark the rest of the things, and write the unit test. Let's go to the code and see how we can do that. This is my project structure. I have one API, and in this API, I have one student controller. I am getting all student, getting a student, editing a student, and delete a student. And here I'm injecting a service of type IStudentService. Let's take a look at the service. Here we are injecting our DB context and writing and getting things from database. We are going to create three different types of integration testing here. First, for in-memory databases, and second, create a kind of integration test that you need to really have one test server, somewhere test environment, deploy your code there and run the integration test on the test environment. And at last, we are going to talk about how to write integration test that doesn't need test environment and you can run everything inside Docker. Okay, let's start with in-memory database. In ASP.NET Core, we have a class called WebApplicationFactory. This WebApplicationFactory is responsible for running your ASP.NET Core application behind the scene, sending the request to that and get the response. I guess the best way to understand that is seeing an example of that. I'm going to write a test here, xtest. I have one code snippet to create my unit test, and it is the code snippet. It makes my life really easier. I'm going to paste the name here on getStudents, then execute API should return the expected result. First of all, I need to create one instance of WebApplicationFactory. Let's do it like that. I'm going to write here var factory equal new WebApplicationFactory. You need to pass the bootstrapper class of the API project or ASP.NET Core project that you want to run. Here in my example, in the database project, I have program.cs and it is my bootstrapper. Fine, I created my factory. But how can we do that? We are going to use in-memory database. But how this WebApplicationFactory helps us? In my program.cs class, we are configuring all our dependencies. Here I am going to tell that I have one school DB context and we are using SQL Server and we are passing this connection string to that. What I really want to do is change my dependencies. I want to tell my ASP.NET Core engine that when I'm going to request for a school DB context, do not provide me one SQL Server, provide me with one in-memory SQL Server. How to do that? First, let's start with installing some dependencies. Let me right click and manage NuGet packages, go to the browse, and I'm going to look for Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC testing. I have this package installed, and it is the package that provides you with Web Application Factory. After that, I'm going to install one in-memory database that we can use using entity frameworks. I'm going to use Microsoft Entity Framework in memory, select it and install it. And now it is time to find the dependency that we have for the DB context, to remove it and inject a new one. How can we do that? We have a method called with_web_host_builder, and it is returning the builder that we have here. What builder I mean? Here we have a web application builder, and this web application factory is going to return the builder. What next do I need is get the services out of that. Using the builder, configure test services, I can have access to the services that I want. The first thing that I need to do is just to find the service that I have and just remove it. How can I do that? Just by type services.remove and then pass the type that I want to remove. Here the type I want to remove is the type of DB context option and a school context. I need to change it to remove all because I want to remove all services that we registered for this time, and now it is time to register in-memory database service. How to do that? Easy. Services.addDB context, and the DB context that we have is the school DB context, and the rest is really easy. We need to pass option, and after that the connection string. Here you can see that I am not using SQL Server. In the option, I am using in-memory database, and I need to pass a name to it. Be careful, this name is not really a name. It is a kind of connection string to your in-memory database. Then use it carefully. We will see that it will mess up your tests. First thing I need to do here is to seed my database. For doing that, I need to get the dependency injection and create a service out of that. Here I can use var scope equal factory that services create a scope. We are going to create a scope, and after that inside the scope we can get the service provider using the scope, and then we are getting the service using the get required service and passing the type. It is generating our DB context. I need to be sure that my database is created. I need to write DB context that database ensure created, and then I'm going to add a student. This student has some dummy information like first name is name, family one, name one, and a birthday. And after that we need to just save the context. What else do we need to do? We have a Web Application Factory. Web Application Factory is creating a server for us behind the scene, but I need to send a request to that. Web Application Factory has a method which is called create client, and this create client creates a client for us. It is really like HTTP client. You can send something to the server, get something from server, and easily use that. Now it is time to send a request to server and get the response. It is really easy. I am going to use the client and get async and pass the address that I have, which is here API students get all async, and I need to change it to async task. And how can we get the result? The result is inside the body of this response, and easily I can just use the response.content.read from JSON async and tell it that it is going to have a list of students, and it is going to deserialize everything and place them inside result. I need to do some assertion, but I really like to do it using Fluent assertion. Let's see Fluent assertion and install it. And here I just want to use them. For example, the first thing that I want to check is to check if the status code of my response is okay, which means that there is no error there. And after that, I'm going to check the number of the students that it is returning should be just 1. And then I'm going to check the rest of the results. I'm using Fluent assertion here. Usually in my integration test, in all my test projects, I have a fixture and helper folder ready to use them. And here I'm going to globally use fluent assertion because in all my classes, I really like to use it. I don't need this one anymore. And let's clean it up a bit more. And let's see how it works. Let's go here and run everything. Okay, and all my tests are passed. Let's set some breakpoints here and see how it works. I'm going to place a breakpoint here. I'm going to place a breakpoint here inside my web host builder, and I'm going to set another breakpoint here inside my configure test services. Let me go back to my project and create one breakpoint here to test my application. It is really funny. When I debug it, you will see that first it tries to run this factory. If I press on a step into, it will goes to the next line. And in the next line, when it is trying to create the scope, it tries to run the web host builder. It tries to run this method. And it is not running the configure test services because always it needs to create a builder out of web application create builder and run the services here in this part and add the dependencies. And here in this line, before building everything, it is going to run your configure test services. It is the reason that you need to remove everything here because all your dependencies have been registered in advance. And now you can add the dependency that you want, and then the rest of the things will get executed. Let me remove all these unnecessary breakpoints and go back to the project that I have. Now I'm going to use my helper. Inside my helper, I really like to have a class called HTTP helper. Let me create it, HTTP helper. Why I'm going to use that is to register all the APIs that I have, the address of the APIs, and use them. It is a best practice to write them down once and use it later. And I'm going to refactor my code inside my code instead of writing the string for the request here like that. I'm just going to use my helper. And in the helper, we have URL and get all students because I'm going to use this helper a lot. I'm going to add a global using for that. Not to mention it every time, and just let's remove this one. And every time after making a change, you need to be sure that your test is still running. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to test is testing if we can add something to the database or not. I'm going to use my code snippet. The method name is onAddStudent. When execute, the controller should store in database. And easily, I'm just going to configure my factory. I'm going to use these two parts and just change them a bit for the sake of time. I am configuring my factory, and here I am creating a scope. I don't want to insert anything here specifically. I just want to ensure that my database is creating before try to send something to that. The next thing I really want is to create a client. And then I need to create a student object and just pass it to my API. We created a student here. Let's just use what we had here. I'm going to call it var new student equal this one. Fine. We arranged everything. Now it is time for writing the act part. In the act part, the first thing that I need to do is writing a post async. Here I'm going to create a post async request, and I need to send a request to an endpoint, and my endpoint is addStudent. And what else do we need? We need to have one HTTP content. Okay, then let's create an HTTP content because we cannot pass our student directly. This HTTP content should be something like that. What I always do is create an HTTP context by instantiating a string content, and JSON converter is going to serialize my object. I'm telling it that the encoding that I have here in this content is UTF-8, and the application JSON is the content type that I want to send this content with. Let's place it here. And now we are done with posting async. We just need to change it to async, and task, and we will see no more issues here. After sending, we need to get the student and get the responses here. I'm copying and pasting exactly the code that I had. I am sending a request for getting all the students. I am returning it to the list of the students. And now I'm going to write some assertions. The assertions that I want is exactly like the assertions that I had before. I'm just copy them and paste them here. I am checking if everything is fine in getting, and I am checking the data that I have. The only thing that I really need to check more is to check if the request itself returning the OK status or not. Fine, let's run the test and see the result. It is not working. Funny, why? Let me do them one by one. I'm running this one, get a student, it is working, and running the other one, and it is working separately. The reason is that, can you remember that I told you it is like a connection string? Which means that both my methods, both my tests are pointing at a database, and this database, this in-memory database, is sharing context. Just by changing the name of one of the in-memory databases, I will see that I have no other issue anymore. How can we refactor this code and make it a bit more clean? Because this part of my arrange and this part of the other arrange that I have in the other method are exactly the same. I'm creating one constructor method here and passing everything from here and copying everything from here and moving them to the constructor method. And let's see, I want to have a private field for factory. And every place that I'm using factory, I'm just going to rename it. For example, here I'm going to use underscore factory. It is fine. And then here, I'm going to just rename it to underscore factory. Now they're using the field that I have, and it is fine. What else do I need here? It is really nice to, I don't need save change here as well. It is really nice to move, for example, this part to the constructor method, but it is just your taste. I'm not going to change it for you. We have an issue. We are working on one single in-memory database here for these two. How can we ensure that our tests are working properly? Really easy, because you are using in-memory database. When you're instantiating your data, before ensuring that you are creating a database, be sure that you are deleting the database every time that you are running your code. Let's save it and run it and see what will happen. Writing this kind of unit test helps you to run it inside your pipeline, which means that when you are deploying your code and pushing it, as an example, to Azure Git repository, inside your pipeline, you can run it like a normal unit test. But what if you want to really test something in your test environment in some scenarios, like when you are working with files, or when you want to check the transaction, when you want to check the concurrency in your database, when you are using some heavy store procedures, you really need to have one SQL server somewhere and send your request against the real server. And in-memory database doesn't work that much good for you. Let's see how can we do that. In my Solution Explorer, let me close everything. I have a test environment class. For the test environment class, first I'm going to use IClassFixture. IClassFixture is an XUnit interface which let us to share a context between all the methods that we have, all the test method that we have inside a class. How? Let's see. Here I have one simple unit test. I put some breakpoint here and I'm going to just test it. Let me debug it. As you can see, XUnit promises that by running tests, for each test, it is going to instantiate a class for you, run the constructor method first, then run the method. For the next test method, it is going to instantiate a new class, run the constructor method, and then run the test method. Using this way of running the test classes, it is ensuring you that the context that you have inside the class is isolated for each of the tests you wrote here. But in some cases, you really like to have a shared context inside a class. I don't need them anymore. Let's get rid of them if it is possible. And go back to the Solution Explorer, go to my test environment and use this IClassFixture. I need to pass a fixture class to it, and this fixture class will be the shared context between all the tests inside my classes. I'm going to give it a name, something like WebApplicationFactory fixture. I'm going to create exactly the same thing here in my application. And inside the fixture folder, I'm going to make it public. Inside the Web Application Factory, I'm going to specify that I have one SQL server somewhere. I want to use it and send the request against that. Then how to do that? Let's start with creating a constructor here. And inside the constructor, I'm going to create a new Web Application Factory. We need to import some namespaces here. We are using this one almost everywhere. Then let's add it to my global usings. Fine, and go back to my factory. Okay, let's add the rest of the dependencies. And it needs to have a connection string. Let me create the connection string here. Okay, as an example, this is my connection string. It is looking for the server on my machine, and it is going to use a user integration or maybe test integration database and write everything there. Here we have a factory. Let's create it. Let's create it like that, and then create a field for that. Fine, we have the factory and we need to create a client out of that. Let me create a client here, and this client I really want it to be a property because I want to use it inside the other classes as well. What else do I need? I need to be ensured that this class, this Web Application Factory fixture, has a lifecycle, which means that I'm going to do some things in a start and do some other things when the test and this context needs to be terminated. For using that, I'm going to use another interface that XUnit provided me with, which is IAsyncLifetime. And IAsyncLifetime needs to implement two methods. One of them is IAsyncLifetime that initialize async. In the initialize async, we are telling the XUnit that this context, when we need it, you need to create a database for me and ensure that it is created. We don't need this save change here for now. And what else? We need to have another method to tell it that when we are going to dispose this context, I want to be sure that the database is get deleted somewhere. I'm going to insert students and get students and compare them a lot. Then it is a hassle to do it every time. Then let's create another fixture, and I'm going to call it data fixture. In this data fixture, and Let's make it public. In this data fixture, I'm going to use a faker to generate the fake data for me, and it is called Bogus. Let me install the Bogus package first. Fine, and go back to the data fixture. Here inside the data fixture, I want to have a code like that. Bogus is accepting some rules for generating the fake data. As an example here, I'm telling it that I'm going to create a faker based on the student. And for each student, for generating the ID, always return 0. I'm returning 0 because if I want to insert it, if it has a number, I will face an issue. For the name, it is using the faker name, first name. For the family, it is using faker name, last name. For the address, it is returning the address. And it is going to give me a birthday. And a birthday is between 2010, from the 1st of January 2010. And it is going to generate some fake birth times from the 1st of January 2005. Here I told it to go 5 years back and try to generate between these two dates for me. We have a use seed here. It is really important. We have not a random thing in the computer science. Every random thing is created based on a random method, and random methods usually accept seed. Here, by passing a seed, I am able to generate fake data which are predictable. Here I am setting 0 to seed, and I'm accepting one boolean for generating new data. If it is set for generating new data, I'm going to create one random seed between 10 and the max value of integer. And by doing that, it is going to create new data. Then every time that I use get students and generate 10 students, it is going to return the same value, and it is save our life. And I'm going to create another get a student here. This get a student is going to use the first student that get students generated. Okay, fine. Let's go back to my using and make this one global as well. And go back to the Web Application Factory fixture. In the Web Application Factory fixture, I want to see some data on initializing the database. First, let's think how many students do we want to add. The initialize students count, I'm going to create 3 students here for initializing my database, and I'm going to add the range here. After ensuring the database created, I am going to ensure that it is adding a range and getting the data fixture get a students, and it is getting 3 students. Fine, let's save everything. I created the fixture. Let's go back to the test environment. Then how can I use this shared fixture? For using that, we need to create a constructor, and inside the constructor, I'm going to tell that it is accepting an object of the class that I'm passing to the IClassFixture. I'm going to call it factory, and let's generate a field out of that. And let's see what else do I need. I'm going to copy and paste it here. It has nothing really new. We have nothing to arrange. Everything arranged for us. On getting a student, we are getting the response, we are getting the result, and we are just checking if the response is okay. And we are checking that we are getting 3 results. This line is interesting because we are getting 3 students. We are not passing a seed to it. Then it is going to generate exactly the 3 students that we generated for seeding the database. And we are going to tell it should be equal to the results that we are getting from the API. But how? Because the user ID, the student ID was 0 for everything. Just by passing an option, I'm going to tell it exclude the student ID in your comparing, and it will pass. Now let's test how can we add a student here. In memory database, we created an HTTP content, and I guess we have a room to improve our helper method. In the helper method, I'm going to create one method to generate this HTTP content for me every time. I'm going to call it get JSON HTTP content. I'm going to pass it an object. I'm serializing it and telling it that it is UTF-8 and the content type is application JSON. Let's save it and create my test. Here I'm going to paste it just for the sake of time, and you can see I am generating a new student using my fixture. I'm going to generate a new student, not an old one, and then I am going to post it async. I'm using the method that I created in HTTP helper and test everything. Let's see if it works or not. Let me run it and see. Great. Let's check how it works. I'm going to place some breakpoints here to understand how it works. And let me close unnecessary things and go back to the Solution Explorer. Inside the fixture, I'm going to create one breakpoint here inside the constructor method of the fixture on initialize and on dispose. And let's run this, let's debug this test. First of all, let's take a look at my database. Here in my database, I have just one school and auth demo. I don't have test integration. First thing it runs is creating the fixture. Okay, after creating the fixture, it tries to initialize async. By initializing async, it is going to create a database for me and use and set it with the data that I asked it to. Let me refresh the databases. I can see the test integration here. If I go here and just select it, I will see that I have 3 names here. Fine. And let's run it. After that, after running the fixture, after initializing that, then it is going to run the construction method of my test and create the factory for me and run the first test. After running the first test, it is going to run the constructor method again, but it is not going to initialize the database and the fixture anymore. It is the key for sharing the content between all the methods that we have. And let's test this one again. Here we posted something. We posted a new student. Let's run it again. We can see that there is another name here and it is getting it. And at the end of everything, when everything is done, when there is no other test in my class, the context should be disposed, and it is disposing it async like that. And now if I just refresh my databases, I don't know what happened here. Yes, I cannot see this database anymore. It is really easy and effective way to write unit tests, but for this kind of unit tests, you need to have one test environment. In Azure, when you want to have test environments, you need to have them always running because you don't know when you are going to deploy into Azure, and it costs you a lot. But there are some other ways to save you this money. What if you can create one Docker-based SQL server and test your data against this Docker container? There is an open source library which is called TestContainers. They have a test container available for .NET. You can easily generate a container. You can easily create an image and run it as a container and create a database inside that and test your data there. It is really nice. Take a look at the documentation and just be careful. Most of the documentation that you will see and most of the videos that you will find inside internet is using a code which is not working on your machine anymore. Why? Because recently they changed a lot of names, for example, from iTestContainer container to iContainer or iDocker container to iImage. And they are doing it a lot. If you just look at the release notes of their changes in the past 2 or 3 releases, they did it a lot. Be sure that reading this documentation to save you a lot of time. And by the way, all the examples that I'm writing in my channel, you can find them here in Test Foundation playlist. I have some other repositories here for the other playlists that I'm creating inside my channel. You can check them again. You will learn a lot of things out of checking this code. Let's go back to Visual Studio and write a test using test containers. The first thing that you need to have is to have a Docker desktop installed on your machine. This is my Docker desktop, and in my Docker desktop, I have no image and I have no container. The first thing that we need to do is just adding some dependencies. Let's go to the NuGet package manager and search for the test containers. The first thing I want to install is TestContainers. Let's install it. And then because I'm going to use MS SQL Server inside my test container, I'm going to install this package as well. You can create whatever image you want and run it, but using this one, MS SQL, is way easier than creating it by yourself. In practice, Docker and one test environment should be exactly the same, which means that if I copy everything from here, all the tests from here, and just paste them here in my new class and just configure it to use Docker instead of using SQL Server, it should work. I need to create a fixture for this one. I'm going to create a class fixture to share the context, the Docker context between both tests that I have, and I need to pass a fixture to it. I'm going to call it Docker WebApplicationFactory fixture. As you will realize, I'm not really good with naming my classes, but yeah, it is who I am. Okay, public, we are going to make it public. Let's change it a bit. I'm going to, instead of using WebApplicationFactory, inherit from WebApplicationFactory here and show you how to use inheritance with it. And after that, I need to have IAsyncLifetime as well. First, let's create the constructor method, ctor tab. And here I'm going to create a container for my SQL server. How to do that? I am going to use var something like db container equal new MS SQL builder. You need to use a builder first to build an image. I'm going to create this builder.build. And what is the result of this builder? It is returning one MS SQL container. And let's change it like that. I'm going to create a field for it. I guess it is a bit better now. And let's implement IAsyncLifecycle here. For doing that, first I need to write down my initializeAsync method. I am creating the initializeAsync method here. I am telling the db container to start async. It is going to run the container for us. After running the container, I have access here to the database inside the container. But we need to configure our WebApplicationFactory to use the database inside my container. I need to change the SQL server address that we had. Let me go back here. You will see that we are passing one SQL server address or connection string here to get connected to the database. But here we don't know on which port it is going to be hosted. We don't know the database name. We don't know username. We don't know password. How to do that? We will see in a minute. And let's write the code for stop async. I'm going to paste it here, and in the stop async, we are just stopping our containers. Like the previous example that we had, we are going to initialize some students. Let's have one property for that, and it is just 3. And how to configure our web application factory. It is the most important part here. Let's see what do we have here to override. I have something here for configure web host. I guess it is what I want. And now I can write down the rest of the things that we had from a builder, because it provides me with a builder. From a builder, I can configure the test services, and inside the services, I need to remove all the dependencies of the type DB context option school DB context. And we need to use SQL Server with a connection string. How can we get a connection string? We can create the connection string variable and ask the DB container to get the connection string to us. And using that, we will have a Docker container which has SQL Server installed in it, and we can test against that. Let's see what will happen. I'm going to place a breakpoint here and another breakpoint here and run the test. Let's go to the test explorer, run the test. First, I'm going to run it to see if it is working or not. After that, I'm going to debug it and see what will happen. Let me bring my Docker desktop here and wait for it to download all the images from internet and run the container for us. Oh, before doing that, we have some errors here that we need to address first, because we don't have the factory here. Let me create a constructor method. What do we need here? We need to have a factory for sure. We need to have a factory and store it somewhere. Let's generate a field for it. And what else do we need to have? We need to use the factory and create the client. Let's do it like that. And create a client. And here, change it like this. The previous one would work as well, but I really like to change it to this to show you. You can use inheritance here to change your code a bit. Let's run it again, see if there is any error. No, build is successful. And let's bring up the Docker desktop and see. The first thing it does is creating one Docker image behind the scene. Inside this Docker image, it is going to create the Docker compose for us and then run the Docker compose using --rm, which means that after running everything, it is going to get rid of the containers. It tries to download SQL Server. It is really heavy. It is something like 1.5 gigabytes because it is going to install the SQL Server inside the Docker for me in the image. Let's wait for that and see what will happen. Yeah, we have it here ready. It was really fast. If I go to the container, I will see that we have some images here. One of them is this one, and the other is for the test containers. When the test is done, it is going to exit the container and remove it from my containers inside the Docker container. You will see that it is not working anymore. Let's see. Yeah, it executed everything and after that remove itself. And now it is time to have fun and see the magic here. Let me create put another breakpoint here as well and just debug it. By debugging it, I am going to connect to the database that I have inside my Docker container. Let's let it to run the container. In the container, I will see that it is running. And now it is going to create the scope for me. It is creating the scope. I want to connect to my database that I have inside the Docker. Then I need to see the connection string here. Okay, this is the server address. I need to connect to this server address. I have to use SQL authentication. The user was SA and the password was your strong password. Nice one. It is an auto-generated password and it is not that bad. As you can see, an SQL server is installed there and there is no database here. Let's see, let's give it time to ensure that the database is generated. Yes, after this part, it should generate the database for me. Let's go back here and run it. Inside the databases, I have no other database. And as you can see, this SQL server is running on Linux. Why it is not creating a database for me? Because when they developed the MS SQL server, I guess they were a bit lazy to do some fixes on creating the containers, and they are just using the master database for creating the tables. If I go inside the master, you will see that the student is created here and there is nothing in it. If I just let it to save the changes and then run it, I will see that 3 students are added. If I go here and let my test to add another student and post another student to server, I will see the 4th one as well. Nice and easy. And at the end, it is going to stop the container for me. It is really nice and easy way to test your application without having so many servers on your test environment. You can create container for all your APIs, for your Redis, for your Kafka, for everything, and test your application on a machine with just running some containers. It is amazing. There are some pitfalls in using Docker containers and SQL containers, SQL test containers. If you are interested to know more about them, just let me know. I will create a video for that one. And if you have any kind of questions, do not forget to ask me inside the comment section. Do not forget to like this video if you like it and subscribe it, and let your friends know that my channel exists and I'm creating videos. Stay tuned, keep learning, keep coding, keep enjoying life as a developer.